On a day when rain was falling, a drop had formed on the window, holding its place without giving way to the pool below, where the surface of the glass met the curve of the water. The foam held until a single movement carried it downward, and in that movement the shape altered, and where it stopped, in the place of its stopping, it altered once more. On a different day, another drop had formed on the window, and though the window and the glass remained the same, its time was its own. One lingered before flowing, one fell as soon as it appeared, one joined the bead beside it and grew into something larger. And though each was called a drop, within that name a different motion was unfolding from one occasion to the next. The camera reached toward this motion, to say with the sense that while the foam held its shape, the next moment had already entered, and that this was taking place differently from one instant to the next. A phrase from 𝗔𝗯�𝘁𝗿𝗰𝘁 comes close here. The self is only a threshold, a door, a becoming, between two multiplicities. A phrase that does not define the self but names the place where motion begins. The drop begins differently within the name drop, as the self begins differently within the name self. And the diary gathers these beginnings, the drop of one day and the drop of another, rain on one occasion and rain on the next, a day and a day beyond. These differences settle in layers, and the texture forms whose grain the diary follows. Since 2019, a small camera has been kept close to the body, a GoPro and a Sony Handycam, something that fits into a pocket. And when a grain of movement has come within reach in the course of a day, the hand has been trained to move towards the camera before the thought arrives. Each shot lingers for only a few seconds. The camera moves with the body and held in the hand, inclines toward the stillness, resisting the impulse to correct. Delay, return, drift. These three form the method kept through filming and editing. And the footage that gathers in this way remains without order and without hierarchy. One year in adolescence, on a ship leaving one's country of birth for another, a single night was spent on the sea, a night under which the ship rocked heavily from the waves. Lying in the bed, the eyes had closed, and as they closed, and the outward coordinates gave way first, those the sight had held in place, and where the walls stood and where the ceiling was above, retreated into the dark. And what remained was the rocking of the ship, and within it, of the bed, and within that, of a body lying there. The waves were arriving in a regular rhythm, yet the question of whether the sea was outside or beneath the bed or within the body had no place left in which to rest. At the moment the ship met the larger wave, the floor slipped briefly from beneath the feet, and the body was lifted and set down again, and above and below turned over, and the ground was no longer there. Bohem writes of atmosphere as indeterminate, above all as regards its ontological status, unsure whether it should be attributed to the objects or environments from which it proceeds or to the subjects who experience it, unsure where it is, something that seems to fill the space with a certain tone or feeling like a haze. The night in which his space and body had turned over gave way to a morning in which another shock arrived. The ship had come to port, and when the feet stepped onto the ground, one air had already withdrawn and another air was filling the world. The air of the land that had been left behind had not seeped into the air of the land that received it. And where the one ended, there the other began. When Boehm writes of atmosphere as quasi-object, atmosphere is described as a something that hovers between bodies and the spaces, something felt with the immediacy through the way it affects the body yet resistant to location. Between the two airs of the morning, however, there was not resistance but passage, a moment in which one atmosphere withdrew as another took its place. Atmosphere had been understood as what sits and spreads, yet the two atmospheres of that morning were severed and folded alongside the mode of atmosphere that the quasi-object was meant to hold. Another mode can stand, the mode of modulation. Two filmmakers have worked within the diary form in different grains, and the work gathers within a shared lineage. As Tom Cuthbertson notes, 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿 video seems to move from location to location, traversing vast distance across space and time, scrambling the certainties of fixed coordinates. The gaze often fixes on movement from a train, from a passing boat, along the wild of Scotland, while the voice hovers at the periphery of the frame and bodies pass through in gestures that echo geography rather than inhabiting it. In Bridget in 2016, spatiality unfolds through a layering of narrative inside and outside the frame, shot on an iPhone and carried by Proger's own voice. The work composes what might be called portrait territories, linking personal memory to historical context through voice-over reflections. The voice stays present yet fragmented, layered, interrupted, often in the past tense, blurring the line between reflection and immediacy. To quote Progers on the reflection between body and camera, and if you are filming in a landscape and the wind is pushing the tiny microphone to its limit, like ripping it, and if you try and do a static shot, you see your body breathing. The system of the body are enmeshed with the camera. Is a kind of symbiosis, but also a kind of grappling. In this symbiosis and grappling, the self stays open, in motion, responsive, relational, contingent. Space here is a layered surface that floats around the moving subject. For Cuthbertson, the territoriality in Proger's work asks how the self in and of the world takes shape, and how the order and categorization of that world are transformed. Jonas Mekas' camera trembles on a different frequency. The camera, swaying with the body, turns time into breathe. From Walden in 1968 to as I was moving ahead, occasionally I saw brief glimpses of beauty in 2000. In camera decision, privilege, the sensation of classification, and poetic editing worked by subtraction. Each long take, handheld and slightly trembling, mirrors the body's rhythm, resisting fixed order, at times closer to a durational performance, at other times a compositional recording of fragments that moves beyond archival accumulation. For Mekas, editing happens inside the shot. He called this process in-camera editing, composing within the film while filming. And post-editing was reserved for removing what he called badly written paragraphs. Reality for him was already composed inside the camera. In a 2019 interview, Mekas redefined poetic feeling as the ultimate condensation of life, and I quote, place, time of the day, the weather, and your thoughts, feelings at that moment, in any art, any medium, or life itself. In this definition, the interior of the subject and outside form a single condensed field. The condensation extends beyond the cinema, occurring in any art, any medium, or in life itself. Project carries the diary within the negotiation with the landscape. Mekas holds it within the proximity of breathe. The camera kept close to this body stays between these two, drawn to reading landscape as atmosphere, drawn to the duration after the breath has already become atmosphere. What is this atmosphere and how does it relate to the diary? Project reads landscape through territory, and atmosphere arises within the territorial frame. Mekas holds the closeness of breathe, and atmosphere gathers within the nearness. The camera kept close to this body moves one step farther. When landscape opens beyond territory into atmosphere, and when breath dissolves into the duration that gathers after it has settled as ambience, the question of what atmosphere is returns. It returns through Bohem. Bohem in atmospheric architectures writes that atmosphere leads the viewer into absorption. The phrase goes as follows: to observe it into one's own bodily disposition. What is sensed is an indeterminate. Rather than the body perceiving the atmosphere is observed into the body's disposition, and what is sensed within it is an indeterminate quality of feeling, spatially diffused, that cannot be located. Griffaro extends this thinking by grafting Smith's new phenomenology onto Whitehead's process philosophy. Perception, as Griffaro records from Whitehead, is a vague feeling of influences from vague things around us. In this formulation, atmosphere expands into a space where tone, texture, and strain are enveloped, and it operates as a perceptual, affective, and relational field. Atmosphere is not a background. A background recedes behind action, while the atmosphere saturates the condition through which action can take place, a charged spatiality that shapes how something becomes feelable. The position of the body shifts within this field. The body is not the source of sensation. The body is co-shaped by the field through which it moves. When the ship and the berth and the waves and the body stayed within a single rocking, the body was not sensing space. Space was flowing into the body's disposition and composing the body together with itself. Alcester, reading Benjamin's late essays, bring in the distinction by which modern perception fractured the continuity of Enfrahung into the fragmentation of albiness, where Enfrahung is an integrated experience that accumulates across a life. Albiness is isolated unit of shock, registered only inwardly, the tremor inscribed on the body before it can be narrated. To quote the proposition Alcester reaches through this distinction, loss of experience in modern world was in actual fact the always already present experience of loss in human existence. This fragmentation resonates with the rhythm of diaristic practice, the rushed cut, the held frame, the brief tremor, in which experience bends back onto itself and dwells as a collection of discontinuous sensations. The diary is a method that lets fragments remain fragments while permitting them to modulate one another. Where, then, is the self? Within Bohem's atmosphere that is observed into the body's disposition, within Griffero's vague feeling of vague things around us, within the field that co-shaped the body, within the fragments of albiness before they are narrated. The self is neither static nor singular. It is unfolding event, a threshold between atmospheres. If the self is an unfolding event, a threshold between atmospheres, how does this name take shape in the conditions of dailiness? Dailiness as a mode of self-experience arising through the sensory and temporal conditions of the everyday. Can a machine isolate this atmosphere sustained by accumulation? Or can movement alone be abstracted through the machine? The mold was made from this question. One video was selected from the diary archive and rendered as a sequence of still frames. These frames were fed to a generative adversarial network. The generator tried to reproduce the distribution of the diary. The discriminator distinguished the real frames from what the generator produced. The two models pushed and pulled at each other through training. The difference between one frame and the next stayed below the machine's threshold of discrimination. The frames themselves were too close to each other, and from such closeness the machine could not extract a single representative form. What remained on the screen were black stains spreading across the shifting grounds, marks that never arrived at a form, a spread of mould, and a cast of a mould. The work carries this name. Where representation loses its stability, atmosphere forms. Stale writes at the opening of In Free Fall, if there is no stable ground available for our social lives and philosophical aspirations, the consequence must be a permanent, or at least intermittent, state of free fall for subject and object alike. But why don't we notice? While you are falling, you feel as if you are floating or not moving at all. Falling is relational. If there is nothing to fall toward, you may not even be aware that you are falling. The horizon quivers in a maze of collapsing lines, above and below, before and after. Yourself and your boundaries begin to blur together. The one who falls senses themselves as a thing, and things sense themselves as a person. The screen of the mold is a sense of this free fall. Nothing in the machine broke down. Training ran on. The screen held a state of falling that did not look like falling. As 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿 writes toward the end of the same essay, a body that moves toward object without reservation, embracing a world of forces and matter, which lacks any original stability and sparks a sudden shock of the open. Groundlessness is a condition that has already been given, and we have lived under visual systems that take fabricating a ground so that we do not notice it. For 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿, these systems are perspective, both linear and vertical. A step to the side discloses the same structure at the level of representation. The photographic image is a ground of representation, the surface on which the world converges on an object. While this ground holds, we do not notice we are falling. Frames of a diaristic film are fed to the model, which is pushed to the point where it cannot converge on representation. At the site where representation has come undone, atmosphere and movement, the thing felt but not seen, are abstracted. What remains after representation has been filtered out is extracted. If 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿 proposed overcoming the assumption that ground is needed at all, the mold exposes the movement of atmosphere where representation does not arrive. Here, the shape of dailiness changes. The texture once sustained by accumulation is disclosed as being made of movement that does not converge, and of the remainder this movement does not reach. What collapses as dailiness, fragmentary as synthetic, fell through its traces. The self is sensed within the rhythm of traces. It does not stop. The gaze that followed the drop at the window, the steps that passed through the night of the rocking ship, the hands that shook along with the shaking camera, the skin that sensed where one atmosphere passed into another, the eye that watched the spreading of shapes that had not arrived at recognition. All of this has gathered in one place. The name of that place is atmosphere. And this atmosphere is both inside and outside the body, where the turning of two forces return on itself, each time taking a different form. The repetition circles without resolution, neither side overcoming the other, and motion continues through their equal pull. For Deleuze and Guattari, a machine is an operation that cuts into a continuum material flow, as a camera's shutter cuts the flow of moments into frames, as an eyelid cuts the flow of vision into blinks, as breath cuts the flow of air into inhalation. Each machine is a site that takes a portion from what is flowing. The machine here names an operation that runs beneath the subject, an operation turning in things, in bodies, in the world. Every Manning takes up this operation and writes that in action. The operation at the heart of the event is not positive or negative, but productive, and that this is what Deleuze-Guattari meant by the desiring machine. Earlier in the same book, in Artfulness, Manning takes this operation of the machine into the question of the subject, what Whitehead called the superject, the site where experience comes to know itself only after the event has passed. Manning rewrites in her own words, the subject is not what initiated the event, but how the event came to know itself after it had passed. Productive here names continued movement that does not arrive at a form, not the making of a finished product. This is a movement of the diary practices through delay, return, and drift. A movement that does not arrive at a form becomes a non-place, and in that non-place sensation lingers without settling. Through delay, the shot is held longer than the event requires. Through return, the camera goes back to the same site with a slightly altered pulse. Through drift, the voiceover arrives out of sync with the time of shooting, so that meaning arrives late or not at all. The diary composed in this way cannot take a full stop, cannot hold meaning in itself, and each meaning remains without conclusion. Proger has carried the diary across devices and terrain, where territoriality opens the relation of the self in and of the world. Mekas has carried it in a lived nearness, the camera time to breathing, where interior and weather condense into a single field. The camera kept close to this body stays in the charged interval between these two, and moves one step farther, to where representation no longer settles. At that threshold, the atmosphere that reached the body before it was named begins to surface, and the self takes shape as a threshold between atmospheres. These gather in one name, atmospheric subjectivity. Atmosphere, then, is not what the diary produces. Atmosphere is the very condition through which the diary takes form, and the self takes form as an atmospheric self. The night when the ship rocked, nameless returns. The rocking turns. One atmosphere passes into another. Two forces still turn inside the body. The diary remains open as weather passes through.